Hey guys, welcome back to a series discussion video, a type of video that I haven't done in a while here on my channel. But basically what it is I pick a series of games that I've beaten and I rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite game in that particular series. For example, in the past I've done a serious discussion on the Uncharted games. I've done a serious discussion on the new Super Mario Brothers series. And today I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite series in gaming, which is the Resident Evil games. And what better way to celebrate, Halloween horror month than to talk about the granddaddy of the survival horror genre. Not only that, but also this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Resident Evil series, so a perfect occasion for me to discuss one of my favorite series in gaming. And again, like I said, the way this works is I talk briefly about each game and I rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite. What you guys see here is what I consider the 8 mainline games in the Resident Evil series. There's tons of spin-offs out there. But I think this is widely, these 8 games that you guys see here, these are what are considered widely as the mainline games in the Resident Evil series as far as storyline. So with that being said, I'm not going to discuss any other games that you do not see here on this row of games here. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the list of my list. And you see 8 games here, so I'm going to start obviously with my least favorite. And at number 8, no surprises here. If you guys have followed my channel, you'll know that Resident Evil 6 was somewhat of a disappointment for me. And it's no surprise. A lot of the hardcore Resident Evil series fans have expressed their disappointment in the game, basically because it deviates so much from the true roots and the true soul of the Resident Evil franchise. Resident Evil 6 is a pure action, Hollywood-esque, big-budget production game with a lot of cinematics, and as an action game by itself, it's actually a fairly good game. But if you put it in the Resident Evil universe, everything just goes out of line in this game. Everything is big, everything is so much action-oriented that I truly feel that Resident Evil 6 just lost that touch that characterizes the Resident Evil games, and it deviates so much from the original purpose of what a Resident Evil game is that I had a good time with it, I'm not gonna lie, but if I were to consider it among the Resident Evil games, it definitely sits at the bottom of the list. Too much action, too much cheesiness, and too much over the top things happening in the storyline. So Resident Evil 6 gets my number 8 spot, dead bottom last. At number 7, the difference between my number 8 and 7 is actually pretty big. This is where it starts getting difficult picking, what games are going to go in what order. But at number 7, I decided to go with Resident Evil 5, which is a game that I really enjoyed. And it follows that same path that Resident Evil 4 said, which is an action-oriented game more than horror. And a lot of people criticize that as well, and the fact that the game, opened in a daylight basically environment in Africa. A lot of people were upset that the game also deviated from that survival horror element. But I do think that Resident Evil 5 borrows a lot of elements that made Resident Evil 4 really fun. There's a lot of action in the game, obviously, but I really enjoyed the storyline in Resident Evil 5. In my opinion, it was the perfect way to close down the Resident Evil series. Like, if Capcom really wanted to have a closure on the story, I think they could have done it with Resident Evil 5. I really liked the story and the ending, how everything unfolded. And of course, at the time, the graphics were, top of the line, and then the online co-op also brought another added element to the gameplay of that game. But yeah, overall, Resident Evil 5, a very fun game, great storyline, but it falls short because it borrows so much from Resident Evil 4. It just feels like another Resident Evil 4 game, but with a little bit less, with a little bit of a worse level design and just overall progression. So Resident Evil 5 gets my number 7 spot. Now at number 6, I'm gonna go back to the kind of like the old school Resident Evil games, and it was really hard for me to pick this game. I didn't know where it was going to sit, but at number 6, I decided to go with Resident Evil 0, which was originally developed for the Nintendo 64, and it was released on the GameCube. And the cool thing about Resident Evil 0 is that it follows the original gameplay type of the Resident Evil games. Fixed camera angles with pre-rendered backgrounds, and I really enjoyed how the game provided a background on the early parts of the Resident Evil games. This game does a very good job of explaining the progenitor virus, how everything started, how the founders of Umbrella came to be, how the mansion of Resident Evil 1 was built, and so forth and so forth. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the game, how it basically tells the player, what happened, and of course it follows the events of what happened to the first squad that arrived on Raccoon City, which follows the events of Resident Evil 1, and of course the ending of Resident Evil 0 opens the way for the events of Resident Evil 1. So I really like that fact. And as far as gameplay, we have a unique element where you can switch between the characters, Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen, which I really enjoyed the character of Billy. I thought he was like a badass character, and I really enjoyed his personality, and it was a really nice contrast to the naiveness of Rebecca Chambers, which she was new at the time. She was very young, so I really liked that personality clash between the two characters, and of course the fact that there were no treasure chests in this game to store your not treasure chests, but chests, inventory chests. To store your items, so you have to drop them on the ground. So there was a little bit of a tactical element as far as item storage and things like that. So I think where Resident Evil 0 kind of fell flat a little bit was in the enemies. Some of the enemies were not really interesting. They had monkeys and some other types of enemies like that. And the environments themselves, there were more of a repeat of what we have seen in Resident Evil 1. So that's why I decided to put Resident Evil 0 at number 6 on my list. Now at number 5, a game that a lot of people, because this is not a numbered game, a lot of people don't want to consider it as part of the mainline of the Resident Evil games, but to me it is part of the main story of the games, and I'm talking about Resident Evil Code Veronica, sitting here at number 5. And this game originally was an exclusive game for the Dreamcast, and it really introduced a little bit of a different, some 3D backgrounds, and the fixed camera angles were there, but some of the camera angles were moving, following Claire Redfield, which is the main protagonist of the game. And the game does a good job of following the events of Resident Evil 2, which at the end of the game, Claire Redfield sets out to go out looking for her lost brother, Chris Redfield. So this is where I think the storyline began to spin off a little bit. It becomes a little bit way too much out of proportion as far as the places you have to travel, the environment itself where the game takes place, and this is where you start realizing that Umbrella is like a multi world corporation with headquarters and hidden labs spread out throughout the world. And in that sense, in my opinion, it lost that charm of the tightness of the first Resident Evil games. But nevertheless, Resident Evil Code Veronica, it's a very fun game with a very weird set of characters. The Ashford family, for example, pretty sick and pretty weird characters. But overall, I really enjoyed the game. And in my opinion, this is the hardest of all the Resident Evil games that I played. When I play these games, I play on normal difficulty. And I remember in Code Veronica, I had a bunch of times where I was sweating a little bit because of my ammo situation. I'm usually really good at trying to conserve ammo, but in Resident Evil Code Veronica there were a bunch of close calls where I did not have ammos and I had to face a boss battle, and the game, I thought it was a little bit more tougher than your usual Resident Evil game. So overall, I really enjoy the characters. I really enjoy, the graphics back then are pretty impressive. The overall design, some of the puzzles in the games were very interesting, and of course the weirdness of the Ashford, family characters was also pretty sick and just out there. So Resident Evil Code Veronica gets my number 5 spot on my list. We're going up in the ranks, and at number 4, I'm going to pick Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. A fantastic game that is very, very similar to Resident Evil 2 as far as the gameplay, the graphics, the setting. But what I really, really like, and what sets this game apart, because everything else is really, really the same, is the main villain of the game, which is Nemesis. Nemesis, simply put, is, in my opinion, one of the most scary and just memorable villains in any video game, because this motherfucker is gonna follow you throughout the entire game and scare you. He will pop up at the most inconvenient places, and you just, the first time you play this game, you're always just sweating and you're on the edge of your seat, because you never know when Nemesis is gonna show up. And of course, when he shows up, he is a bullet sponge. You know, you can grab your shotgun and just shoot him in the face a million times, and this guy won't go down. So there's always that danger element. It was pretty cool in some parts of the game. You can use some of the environment to defeat him, you know, such as electricity and things like that. So it was really cool just to have Nemesis follow you around. It was a very, very tense game, but the overall gameplay remained the same. There were a couple of things such as dodging. You can dodge attacks in Resident Evil 3. That was a new element. But the other cool thing was the reintroduction, or the fact that you were able to play again as Jill Valentine, which is personally my favorite character in the Resident Evil series. So it was really fun playing as Jill once again, and it's really cool how the events of Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil 2 intertwine. Basically the two games happen at the same time, basically for the most part. So I thought it was really cool, even though you had to go back and revisit some of the areas that you already explored in Resident Evil 2. I think Resident Evil 3 did a good job of keeping things fresh with the puzzles and some other areas from Raccoon City that you have not, or you did not get to explore in Resident Evil 2. So that was a pretty cool element, but of course, once again, the main draw for me was Nemesis, which is the main villain in this game. So Resident Evil 3 made it all the way to number 4 on my list. And this is it, guys. We're now getting in the top 3, the best of the best. And this was a really hard choice for me, picking between number 3 and 2. My number 1 is pretty well defined, but my number 2 and 3 are up there. It's a flip of a coin, basically, but I decided to go with number 3 with Resident Evil 4, which I have here, the original Day 1 collector's edition from GameStop. And downright, I have to admit, Resident Evil 4 has by far the worst story out of any Resident Evil games that I have in here. The story was cheesy, bland, simple, and stupid. So another thing that maybe I can use as a critic to criticize the game is the fact that it completely changed the Resident Evil formula. No more fixed camera angles, no more tank controls. This was a third-person shooter, so at the time when this game was announced, you know, fans were flipping out. They were pretty upset of the new change that Capcom that chose to go after, and myself included. I was a little bit skeptical. I wasn't sure how the action was going to transition, and I have to say, sure enough, it's not a typical survival horror game, but this game is just pure fun. When I play games, I take the fun factor into consideration a whole lot, and Resident Evil 4 was just way too much fun to play. The action was perfect at the time. When this game came out on the GameCube, there was nothing like it. And there's a good reason why Resident Evil 4 is, considered one of the most influential video games of all time. It was, at the time, there was nothing like it. The graphics were amazing. The animations when you reload your weapons was just simply amazing. Collecting the money or the treasures as you went along the game, and then when you get to the merchant, and you start upgrading your weapons, you immediately notice a difference. So there was always that incentive of killing the most enemies, getting all the pesetas, the money currency, and just upgrading your shotgun. The reload, the fire rate, the power of your shotgun, of your handguns, of your sniper rifles, the different types of weapons that you can choose in this game, the different ways that you can kill your enemies, the ganados in this game, which are not really zombies, but it was just so much fun. Using melee attacks, your knife, your weapons, upgrading your weapons, and the progression in this game. Even though it's a very long game, the game never overstated its welcome. Every area that you visited, there were new enemies, there were new puzzles, and the story, even though it was bad, it didn't really matter because it was the fun factor of the game that kept you going. So Resident Evil 4 is one of the most addicting and fun games of its time. Obviously some of the controls nowadays are pretty dated, but this game set the pace for third-person shooters out there. It's a very influential game, and there's one reason why this game is always at the top of the best games of all time list. So Resident Evil 4, despite its really shitty story, in my opinion, the gameplay made up for it, the graphics made up for it, and which is why I decided to pick Resident Evil 4 at number 3. At number 2, like I said, it was a flip of a coin because this was a very fun game, Resident Evil 4, but I decided to go with Resident Evil 2 as my number 2 game on my list. Reason being, it just took what Resident Evil 1 did and made it better as far as graphics, this overall scope of the game. In Resident Evil 1 you were secluded in this mansion in the forest, but Resident Evil 2 just took that and opened the scope. You're now in Raccoon City, in the downtown area, and you have to pick Claire Redfield or Leon Kennedy. The characters in the game. It was just a really fun and ambitious game at the time. There was really nothing like it, and it was the perfect sequel in my opinion because it just made the first game so much bigger in terms of gameplay, in terms of choosing your characters and the graphics and so forth. So Resident Evil 2 is just a very well designed video game. I really enjoy the fact that when you play as a Leon A scenario, for example, and then once you beat the game, you get to play Claire B, and then you get to see a better ending if you intertwine those two, or if you link those two storylines. You get a better ending or a longer ending. I remember at the time I was blown away, and just the overall, the enemies, the introduction of the liquor, and also the sick puzzles that you had to do in the Raccoon Police Department. They were just very interesting, very gory, just a very gory and very mysterious game at the same time. So Resident Evil 2, I think it took just that scope and blew it out of proportions. And at the time when this game was released, there was nothing like it. It was, in my opinion, one of the most perfect and well made sequels to any video game out there of all time. So Resident Evil 2, I had to go with it. It's classic Resident Evil with classic puzzles, fixed camera angles, tank controls, and a very interesting story that follows up on the events of Resident Evil 1, obviously. So Resident Evil 2 gets my number 2 spot. And of course, I have 8 games here. I have talked about every single one of them with the exception of one. And that game is none other than Resident Evil 1, the remake. For the Nintendo GameCube, but we can make a case that the original Resident Evil for the PlayStation as well would have made my number 1 choice. But I have to go with specifically the remake for the GameCube, which nowadays is available on the Nintendo Wii, and they have the remaster available for the PS4, Xbox One, and all that. So, simply put, this is survival horror at its best. The first Resident Evil 1, even though it's not as ambitious as, for example, Resident Evil 2 as far as the scope of the game, yes, you're secluded in this mansion, tucked away in the outskirts of Raccoon City. But that's exactly what made the game so much tense and fun, and just the overall pinnacle of survival horror. You're trapped in this mansion. You're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. You have all these puzzles and rooms that you have to figure out how to progress, finding the keys, and just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, really. Why are there zombies? Why are they, attacking people and things like that? And of course, you're trying to figure out what's going on between your own teammates, the STARS members. And of course, as you progress through the game, you find out certain things that make you wonder who's betraying who and what the hell's going on. But Resident Evil 1, the remake, is just the perfect remake. The graphics were vastly improved. When this game came out on the GameCube, there was nothing like it. And I dare to say, I think this game still looks fantastic. Even if you put the GameCube version on a TV, the pre-rendered backgrounds are timeless. They just did a fantastic job of creating that mood and that just that atmosphere with the mansion. It was just the perfect atmosphere in any video game that I've ever played. It was scary. It was just a very somber place and very scary place to be, and you can feel that when you play the game. And of course, the fixed camera angles and the tank controls add to that tension, and of course the enemies as well. In the this is a very challenging game, even if you play on normal. You know, sometimes it takes a lot of shots to take down a zombie. So Resident Evil 1, the remake, in my opinion, is the pinnacle of survival horror. That's where this is basically where it all started. Sure, Alone in the Dark and other games came before Resident Evil, but this is the game that set the pace, and this is the game that I still fall back and refer to as far as survival horror. This is just the best expression based on like I said, the atmosphere, the gameplay of the game, the puzzles, the story. Everything comes together in a beautiful package, and which is why Resident Evil 1, the remake, is #1 on my list. And it's also not only that, but it's one of my favorite games of all time. And if you guys have a PS4 and you were never able to experience this game back in the day, please do yourself a favor, buy the HD remaster. Some things may be dated, such as the gameplay, the tank controls, which I think you can change them now. But the gameplay itself will be a little bit antiquated as far as getting the keys, getting to looking at your map, trying to figure out what places you visited, what rooms you have to go next. But do me a favor, play the Resident Evil remake and respect it for what it is. Respect the roots of what the genre of the survival horror is. So that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed my list. Just a quick recap here. At number 8, Resident Evil 6. At number 7, I have Resident Evil 5. At number 6, I have Resident Evil 0. Number 5, Code Veronica. Number 4, Resident Evil 3. Number 3, Resident Evil 4. Number 2, Resident Evil 2. And my number 1 game, my most favorite game, Resident Evil game, is Resident Evil 1, the remake. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. In the comments, make sure you share your experience with the series and give me your thoughts on what game is your favorite or whatever. So until next time, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all later.